Well, hello, and welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey chit chats. And it's gonna look like I read a lot more than I actually read this week because I finished out some big chunky books, and I was mainly just chipping away at the stuff I had already going and not doing a ton of new reading. So what I finished out, let's start with the one I don't have on hand, and that is Death's End by Cixin Liu and translated by Ken Liu. No relation as far as I know. This was interesting. It's the finale of the Three Body Problem trilogy. And this is a sci-fi series that's very kind of like dry and technical and really focused on scientific concepts, very caught up in things like time and dimensions and space, but it's also a first contact story. So I can't talk too much about the details of this book because we are so far into it, but I would say that the first book, you're mainly focused on contemporary time for the most part. You're looking at scientific advancements and also really centered in this game that's going on, as well as the first contact element and how humanity would deal with first contact. But books 2 and 3 are almost happening concurrently. So book 2, we kind of jump in from contemporary and go through a far, far future, looking at defense from more of a psychological and intelligence, like military intelligence, not like mental intelligence, an intelligence perspective. And they have this wall facer program. In book 3, we move to defense in more of a aggressive stance defense called the sword holder program. And so we're jumping back to contemporary times after we've gone through a far future in book 2. We're jumping back to a new character who Cixin, who is coming in as just kind of a normal person, it seems like, or they're being very normalized, but they have a lot of ideas. And I think the ideas are the main thing of this book. I think the major focus to this particular book is about problem solving. And I love that. Like, that's something that I did for my job for a long time and love finding solutions to technical problems. And that's what this is all about. So I love that aspect. And especially, like, the whole conceit of it is problem solving in ways that are not limited by what we can do now. So not restraining yourself to the realm of reality, in fact, and just assuming that maybe there will be technological advances or higher functioning societies. And we know over the course of this series that like hibernation and sort of freezing people so that they can have longevity over time is very much a thing that happens in this series. So we follow over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years as during this program, people are intermittently being hibernated and woken up over long time periods where you have entire societal shifts and they're just kind of popping up to check in and make sure things are still on track over these massive timescales. And I think that envisioning these long timescales in ways that look at what happens when the goals and intentions of a whole society have changed, the way the society operates and the hierarchies within that society have really fundamentally shifted, is so cool. But also, this is a really, really dry book. I think especially the audio almost sounds robotic. And I don't know if that was a choice. The narrator is not AI and is someone that is employed otherwise in other books. And so I'm kind of surprised and think that must have been intentional in a specific direction. But I didn't really like it because it made it further dry, though it's a fine audiobook. So I hybrid read it because it is such a long book. So I really wanted to immerse into it. And I like this a ton, but I feel like I'm conflicted about how to rate it or how I react to it because of those aspects. Like, it's so technical. There's no emotional connection whatsoever with the characters. And they're not actually really very fleshed out good characters that you want to spend time with. This is much more a book of ideas. And those big ideas are what has drawn me back to this series over and over, that I just love it. And so it's a great series that I love so much, but also it has really overt flaws and will not be for everyone. So I'm very glad to have read and completed the trilogy because it was well worth it. so worth the time investment because these are 3 really chunky books with very technical details. I didn't understand all of the science. I don't know that it's even all actually realistic science. This is the author that also wrote Wandering Earth and made putting jetpacks and stopping the rotation of the Earth to move it seem like it could be real science, and it's absolutely just utter ridiculousness. So this feels tangible, but I don't think it's actually realism. So, great series. I'm happy to be done with it. I am curious to see what the Redemption of Time looks like being written by a different author in the same sort of series world. Because I'm very, very curious if it will still maintain the kind of dryness that we get with this one. The other large book that I read this week was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Finally, I have finished this after it being on my TBR and on my shelves for like 10 years. Finally started it in October last year and have been slowly plodding away. It is a very slow read. There were points where I was reading for hours and would only get through like 10 pages. It's experimental, it's oddly formatted, so you will get just like strange pages with almost nothing on them. You'll get things that are upside down. You get all kinds of different types of documents. And what this is doing in the sort of experimental form is you get the introduction from a man named Johnny Truant, who is telling you about his friend and neighbor, Zampano, that was found dead under sort of suspicious circumstances and had been compiling this book, The House of Leaves, which is an academic kind of scholarly book about a film called The Navinson Record. And this film kind of went viral. Sort of like a strange Blair Witch type of thing, but they can't figure out how what was done in the film is done because it seems impossible even with tricks of filmography. And Navinson is sort of a famous filmmaker, and then he makes this film that follows his family moving into a house. And initially it's very mundane and normal, and you're sort of hearing the stories about that. It takes a while to get there, though. You don't actually hear much about the film to start with. But quickly after they move in, things are unusual in the house. Not spooky haunting type of things, but the space of the house doesn't work. And so that's what is strange about the film. But this being a scholarly academic record of the film, it doesn't just take you through linearly, here's what happened in the film. It's doing these sort of deep dives into strange things. So like there's a whole chapter on the topic of echoes. And it immediately dives into both the idea of the sound echo and also the mythological character echo, before then showing you something from the house and from the film that is relevant to echoes. So you are going really piecemeal through this. It's not totally linear. And for me, I think that maybe that was just a little bit much. I really did enjoy the story of the house and found it quite spooky. I think that this solidly fits in Gothic, like a Gothic house story, because it is maintaining that tension of, well, is this just totally realism and it's a contrived performance for this film, or is there actually something unreal happening here? And that's very typical of the Gothic genre. That tension for the reader is maintained so well through this book. But as you are reading on, it seems increasingly more and more that, or me as a reader, and I think that's the impression it's supposed to give, that, yeah, this was actually just a filmmaker moving into his house. This wasn't them making a film. It was him just deciding to film the normal mundane happenings of moving to this house and starting to live in it with his family, rather than it being a performance. And so I think you are supposed to take that sense of realism and be increasingly horrified by that fact that it's his actual life rather than a film. But there's also, in addition to that, because it's academic, there's lots and lots of footnotes. But Johnny Truant, who is framing around this, who has picked up this document from his friend, is reading it and writing footnotes. But he's not mostly writing footnotes about this story, he's writing footnotes about his own life. And he is kind of a mess. He's a disaster. And so he is getting drunk and on drugs and getting into fights and sleeping with women and carousing. And he is increasingly taking up space in this book. And I think space is really the theme of the book. We see the white space on the pages as things are happening in the house. This strange thing about the house, prominently at the beginning, is the space, and the white space on the page, I think, spreads out also as things with the house spread out. And we see emotional space as a big element between the characters in the film. And I think that is the prominent sort of takeaway that I got here, was that concept of space and contextualizing of space, both physically and emotionally. But I feel like it was so much to wade through. I really, really enjoyed the house story. I also really, really enjoyed at the back. There's like, it's a fictional appendix and exhibits of things that are associated with this, and all of this extra collected materials and stuff. So reading through that, there's a collection of letters that have nothing to do with this. They're from Johnny Truant's mother to Johnny Truant, and that is almost its own separate story, and is wonderful. And so I thought the house story and the letter story were two separate books that I would have read and loved. But wading through this was such an effortful that I feel it didn't pay off enough. I can understand why it's there, because you're so heightened by having to pick through looking for, why is all of this stuff here? Like, why am I reading this? And I kept trying to convince myself to read more lightly on the stuff that was surrounding and more academic, so that I wasn't spending huge amounts of time on it, and realizing I was like, why am I reading these paragraphs of French when I don't speak French? And I just couldn't stop myself from it. And so when something finally does come up that is clear and overt, like you're so heightened and attuned and waiting for anything to happen that you are extra emotionally engaged. And so I get that, but it just was not an even payoff for how much effort this was to read, I think, for myself. And you are very much picking through. You only get these little glimpses into the story of the film. But I think it was a good book, a very, very good book, and I'm really happy to have finally read it and experienced it and kind of understand everything that went on. It is really impactful. I just kind of think I would have been fine with reading just the actual story and not having this whole convoluted framing device that took way, way, way longer, probably 10 times longer than just reading the story. It would probably have been a novella. I also, as I said, would have totally read the letters that have nothing to do with this, and I don't know why they're there, but they were a great story. So I'm glad to have finally read House of Leaves. Another win. And lastly, for this week, I picked up a nonfiction book, kind of randomly, but I picked up Walking Each Other Home by Ram Dass and Mirabai Bush. So Ram Dass I know of is kind of a guru that I'm aware of because of Pete Holmes, a comedian, who got connected with him in kind of his Christian deconstruction and searching for other beliefs and faiths. And he actually has a quote in here. He says, "I've never died, but I'm very interested in trying it one day. Thanks to Ram Dass and Mirabai's remarkable book, Walking Each Other Home, we can all approach the mystery of dying with so much more love, openness, and gratitude than I ever thought possible. If you or someone you love is at risk of dying one day, this book is a must read." So I love that comment. This is conversations on loving and dying, as it says. And so these are conversations between the two of these people as they're processing end of life and death. And I think because of that, it's very accessible and easy to read. It's very light reading. You have very short sections and lots of beautiful art throughout. And it's not like a constructed interview. It's not that at all. It's very much snippets of certain topical conversations that have come up over time. And I found that kind of funny because I think every Buddhist related book I've ever read is really scattered feeling, or it's unorganized, unstructured, I think maybe is the right word. So it feels like very flowy and like you're just sort of moving through moments. So I didn't love this. I think I didn't even know what to take away from it, really. There is some kind of specific advice, especially at the very, very back. There are like practical advice moments, but just moving through these conversations, it isn't really that structured toward being a self-help book or anything. And that's fine. There were these moments of brilliance, like individual lines of real brilliance that made this very worth reading. I also really enjoyed learning more about the Buddhist concept of the soul Hilariously, I found that it's even more convoluted and in-depth and specific than the Christian religious concept of a soul. Like it seems very weighty and detailed how they think of that. But I think what I took away from this most thematically as a whole is the idea of connectedness. And what this is talking about is how our sort of connection with others, regardless of whether we're left behind or we're the person who's dying, that connection is what persists. And they have kind of a metaphysical way of realizing that, but it is a real tangible thing that our memories of someone will continue to be present after they die. And they will remain sort of a part of our life, regardless of whether they're here or not. I also had wanted to escape politics and everything. And I've brought that up a couple times now. And yet, Trump comes up, even in this book, even in a lovely book about positive perception of death. But I do want to read this section because it actually is very good for the moment, I think. Trump is playing people who feel separate, people who don't feel they have power. He's telling them they are really separate from Mexicans, Muslims, Syrians. There's so much anger in these crowds of people. They are chanting, "Lock her up." Thinking of it spiritually, it all seems to come from fear, arising from a sense of separateness, from loss of love, and yearning for security. The stranger as the danger. I was so touched by the Olympics we watched last night. As soon as their race was over, the decathlon athletes began hugging each other, even though they'd been competing minutes before. They were impressive. The main preparation for dying is giving up any sense of separateness. When you feel separate, it's very painful. He continues, even love, when it's conditional, can create fear. Each time we form an attachment to another human being, it is, of course, inevitable sooner or later that both people are going to die. So in a loving relationship, loss is built in, which makes it precious and frightening at the same moment. We know that everything is changing all the time, and it's uncertain. That can intensify the attachment. Many of us have felt the fear of loving too much, the fear and the pain of loving when you know there will be loss. But as we identify more with the soul and remember that we all share the reality of the soul, fear dissipates and trust grows, because the soul is not afraid of death. There is no separation. The soul never dies. And so in that, they're talking about so much the connection between people. I think of that soul that they're talking about as those connections and memories that we have retained. So I thought this was really lovely. I didn't find it as hard-hitting as I kind of expected. I also curiously had picked this up specifically because I read Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and Ram Dass mentions that in here and having read it. So that was appropriate, very, very appropriate. Then, as far as stuff I'm reading, I've picked up a lot of new stuff. I think I've got a couple things ongoing previously to finish out, but new stuff I've picked up. I'm starting a long, slow read of A Song for a New Day. I started Near a Thousand Tables, as promised. I started Vagabond, Tim Curry's new memoir, because that is for my book club, and I need to imminently read that this weekend. And then I also started Guards as a buddy read with Tiffany from Towering TBR, lovely Discworld book from Terry Pratchett. So I think that's all for all the books. Lots of books on the go, and not as much progress as I would like to be making on them. But I also watched some things this week. In my pursuit of escapism, I watched all of the first season of All Creatures Great and Small, which is an adaptation of a book by James Herriot, accounting sort of his life as a rural veterinarian in the Yorkshire Dales, I think, around just shortly after World War II, I believe. And regardless, period drama. And there was a new adaptation of it made recently in the past couple of years, and I had not seen that. There was an older one some time ago, but this new one is really, really fantastic. I loved it. So I binged through the entire first series. And I think what I loved even more than the James Herriot character, who is the main guy, he is an assistant to a veterinarian there, Siegfried, and also Siegfried's brother, who's kind of a troublemaker. But Siegfried and Tristan, the brother, are both kind of inherently have a lot of really unlikable and abrasive characteristics. The show managed so well to actually get across their troublesome aspects, but still make them so likable, and you just increasingly warm up to them. So I adored that. I thought that was just done perfectly. Really, really thought it was a fantastic series. Then the last episode of Jet Lag season 16, I think 16 or 17. I can't remember which season we're on. I think it's 16, came out this week, and I keep up with that show as it runs. I love it. It's definitely one of my favorite shows that's running now. It is a sort of competition game show, travel game, though they don't really win anything. And it's kind of like Amazing Race, but not quite. This particular season, the game was hide and seek in the UK. And so they're taking trains around the UK to hide, and then 2 of them are seekers trying to find. But them being regulars and involved in making the game means they're a lot more respectful and having fun a lot more versus actual competition reality type shows. So I very much enjoy that. It's such a fun show every time, but I feel like they've nailed down a lot of the technicalities they need to make it have fun and playability while also having some great tension for the viewer. So I feel like they're really hitting their stride, where every season is just constant hits, and they've really nailed the elements they need to make it a great season to watch. So very much enjoyed it, so much. The last thing that I watched for the week was Predator 2. I made a slight error in that slowing down, because I detoured to a bunch of romance stuff in December, and so I stopped my project of wanting to watch all of the Alien and Predator movies, and unfortunately the Alien movies are no longer available to me unless I pay for an extra subscription. But the Predator ones still are, and so Predator 2 was my next one, and it was real bad. It was real bad. So if you have somehow not seen Predator like myself, so this second one, we're on Earth in normal times, I think 1980s, and I think that socially there was a very like cops versus drugs conflict going on at this time. And so that is prominent through a lot of TV. But we have these very aggressive, violent cops that we're supposed to be siding with as the good guys. And there is also sort of a shadowy government group that's around that's very military. And the drug element, I was very baffled by, because it's sort of like a voodoo drug gangs. I don't know what was going on with that. Very strange. But there's also a heat wave. And in all of this chaos, in the midst of all of that happening, Invisible Predator shows up and is just killing people off. I don't know. I do not know what the deal was. However, it was entertaining more than the first, I think. There was a little bit more to it. I can't imagine how these actors, these were employed major actors, and they are all so bad. Also, I'm very confused because Bill Pullman seems to be different characters in the two. I don't know. So I don't know if this is supposed to be continuous or what. I have nothing for this. It was a continuation of the weirdness of the previous one. I do think this was better than the first, had more to it, but I still didn't love it. And I wanted to follow along with the Alien ones more because they were much better. So I don't know if I'm going to continue with the Predator ones up until Prey, because I know that one is supposed to be good. So I might just jump to that one. I don't know what I'm going to do. So anyway, that's what I watched this week. That's a lot of rambling. Anyway, otherwise the week was a week. I think everyone continues to be very heavy emotionally, and what's going on in the world remains a lot. I'm feeling really just kind of emotionally wrung out, and had a couple of very emotional moments. Like, I'm definitely a sensitive and empathetic person, like seriously, but it's very internal. I don't often externalize a lot of emotion. But I just started crying a couple times, and thankfully over positive things, but just random, nothing moments that were positive. Like, I was leaving the library and the lady was thanking the janitor, the custodian, for cleaning the entryway because it's still very snowy here and everybody's tromping in with their boots and making a mess. And she was just very kindly and nicely, as she was walking out, appreciating the custodian. And I just start crying, not sobbing or anything, but just tears streaming down my face as I'm walking out of the library because this moment of humanity was so meaningful to me in times when I'm not feeling a lot of humanity. Or I was in walking dogs, and it's very cold still. And so at the shelter, we have a little park area with a walkway and everything. And we can't let the dogs interact, so we have to kind of be careful and follow the path and everything because there's snow is blocking stuff. So because we're trying to keep their paws off of the ground for too long, it was this train of sort of people walking a little way and then sitting on the bench and like cuddling the dog. And so I walked out of the building with the dog to see just this image of people sitting around on the benches with dogs all cuddled up. And it was just like, oh, this is just so lovely and beautiful. Like these people just caring for these dogs, that's sitting in the cold and snow, surrounded by that, just huddled to keep the dogs warm and show them love and give them time outside. It was like, oh, this is just, it's a good thing. So my emotional moments were really tripped by good things, at least this week. I also especially am tired out because I have a minor injury. I got slightly cat attacked. So a pretty gnarly cut on my leg, unfortunately. So it seems okay, but it was a little traumatic for both of us, I think. And I think probably if I had gone to the doctor, it would have been a stitch or two, but thankfully it stopped bleeding after like a day. So I'm not gonna overly worry about it unless it really opens up. But that also means after all my good effort of getting momentum into going to the gym and everything, like I now couldn't go because of snow and everything was closed. And then now I'm trying to not break open a cut on my leg. So I've been very, very lazy as well, which has been kind of good for spending time reading and also watching stuff, but it has meant I've really not done anything at all this week. Hopefully, I think that it's supposed to slightly warm up. We've been having very, very, very cold weather here, and our highs are staying right below freezing, right around freezing, which is fine, but then the low temperatures have been getting very, very low into like single digits and around zero. So I think the low temperatures are going to come up quite a bit to be nearer to freezing, and our daytime highs are going to be staying around the same. So we're not going to have the wild variance, which will be helpful and nice, I think. It's been just very, very cold and frozen everywhere. So hopefully that will start melting things off, though I do think we're supposed to get some snow midweek this week. I'm hoping not. I really don't want more snow because we have more than plenty of it. The poor rabbits outside. I keep seeing them like leaning up, like standing on their hind legs, trying to get stuff off of the little bushes, the bush branches that have nothing on them really, trying to eat. And so I went and got them some cabbage. I break up some cabbage and some stuff that general like roughage that will not freeze hard and solid, at least, so they can have something. Even though I know cabbage is not great for them to have in mass quantities or anything, but I decided to split a cabbage with them so that they can have something to eat at least. Anyway, I've rambled. Today is a rambly day, sorry. I don't know what is going on this week. In my recommendations, oddly both kind of fantasy versus history type of videos. The first is actually a couple weeks old, but it was so long, it took me a while to get through. It was like an hour and a half long. So full feature film of Bernadette Banner. If you do not know her, she's amazing. She does like costuming based on actual period appropriate styles and methods. And so she has a depth of interest in history through that. But she did an analysis of the history of the Wicked movie, like what that world's history appears to be from what we can see in the movie. So good, so detailed. As I said, it's like an hour and a half long. Well worth the watch if you're at all a fan of either the books or the movie, though she does differentiate between the books and the movie, which are significantly different. The other is from Religion for Breakfast, a channel I really love. They do a lot of history for religions, specifically variety of religions. And this one is kind of interesting because it's focused on fantasy in terms of the idea of sacred groves in video games and fantastical stories versus what they actually were in sort of historical mythos. Really, really enjoyed that, and something I would have never even thought. And there's a lot of comparison with like Legend of Zelda in there, which is great. But this is an actual like academic type of channel, so very detailed, in depth versus something just slapped together. Really love both of those videos and highly, highly recommend you check them out. So anyway, that is it for my rambly, very rambly, extra rambly this week. And I'm so very happy and pleased that you have stopped by. Thank you so very much for being here.